and shrimp keepers of all ages. Welcome to Wild Fish Tanks, guys. Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about planted tanks, low tech, low light planted tanks. Actually running a little low light ourselves with the stream setup. This light over here went out, so actually maybe a little better. I think last week we had a little glare, but welcome to everybody who's joining us. Big shout out to Jay Adams, Michael over at Bay Area Aquatics, Candy Overhauls, Pepperland Creek Aquatics, Luis Sanchez, Sandy Pandy. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday. My week's been going pretty good so far. Can't complain too much. Everyone's kind of getting into that holiday vibe. How's it going? HC Aqua, Lumpy Dog. Hope you guys are doing well. This is like that first week. Really, I've seen, Christmas and holiday themed stuff. Work is talking about the potluck for Thanksgiving. I got to figure out what to make. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know. But today, we're talking about plants. We're going to talk about the low light, low tech stuff. Because to be honest, that's what I have experience in. So I'm going to talk about what I have experience in. Stephen Thompson says, haven't caught your live video yet. Always catch the replays. Hey, well, welcome. How's it going? Hope the lives are just as good, if not better, than the replays. Shout out to everyone watching on the replay also. Steve over at Warrior Planet Tanks, Madfish Diva, Petsotics, 4G Budget Fish Keeping. Hope everyone's doing well. If I missed you, I'm sorry. If you have a question, make sure to @ me. Speaking of which, Jay Adams T-shirt came. It's awesome. Thanks. Awesome, man. Glad you got it. Maybe you got yours on right now. We could be twinsies wearing the same shirt. But yeah, Jay Adams, and the other gentleman was the Simply Nobody. I know his name, but I won't get it out there. But Simply Nobody, haven't confirmed if he got his shirt yet. But Jay, thanks for letting me know, man. Appreciate your support. Congratulations. We're going to talk about the benefits of plants, kind of why I got into them. A little low on the volume. Just a little low on the volume. All right, thank you, Candy. Let's see if I can up this up at all. Let's see here. All right. Hopefully this is a little better. Hopefully I bumped it up. Low volume. Thanks, Tampa Tom. Let me know if this is a little better, guys, or maybe too much. But we're going to be talking about the benefits of keeping plants and why I got into plants to begin with. We're going to be talking about different plant types, of course, that work well in a low light, low tech environment. Also different substrates, different types of fertilizers, different critters and stuff that may go along with it. Thank you, Tampa Tom says it's perfect. Lighting and, a few other things. I really want to get started with, kind of benefits and how I attribute planted tanks to almost saving my hobby. When I first got into the hobby, started keeping freshwater tanks, my goal was to keep African cichlids in a planted scenario. That never worked out to be the best, although as I did get into planted tanks and discovering how they can help with filtration, obviously they look beautiful, but how they can help with filtration, they can provide cover for fish, and all the different benefits, I really lean into plants hard. And now the only tanks that I keep without plants are I think it's 2 African cichlid tanks I have right now with no plants. The Gold Ocelot shell dwellers, and then I have a 125 lake tank and Ekin tank. But every other of the 30-something, almost 40 tanks has plants in it. Steve Thompson says, with all the wild fish you've caught and kept, have you ever kept any wild plants with them? Yes, the answer is yes. 2 specific ones are this, 3 actually. There's like a Val, and I'm not sure if it's a jungle Val or Italian Val or a Val Americana or something like that, or eelgrass I've heard it referred to. But I've collected that. There's a type of moss, as well as I believe it's a red Ludwigia. And I believe that those, at least 2 of those 3, maybe the moss is native, but I'm pretty sure that red Ludwigia and that eelgrass thing is invasive. I do have a proper licensure to collect and sell plants. So be sure, if you're going to be collecting wild plants, and even plants that aren't wild could be illegal in your state. So definitely when we talk about planted aquariums, there's definitely some plants, a lot of the floaters especially, that can really kind of take hold and go berserk. So they are illegal in some areas. So definitely check your local regulations regarding that. But yeah, the biggest thing that kind of got me into them was the fact that they help keep the nitrates down. I'm not going to go into a whole big situation in terms of the cycle of your aquarium, but one of the big benefits of them is they will eat nitrates, which are things we don't want in our aquarium for fish. One thing to keep in mind is plants do require 20 to 40 ppm, so make sure you don't want to have zero nitrates. If you have plant a tank with no fish, you're going to be needing to fertilize more often because the fish actually will produce plant fertilizer, essentially their poop. My biggest thing before we talk about different types of plants, my biggest thing in terms of selection, we're going to go over probably at least a dozen or more different types of plants that I've had success with, but I like to go with variety and then kind of see what works for me. Depending on my setup, and we'll get into the different setups and lightings and substrate, but I like to kind of get a few different types and then see what tends to work for me and lean into that. I find I have a better experience with that. I do it with fish as well, and my opinion is do it with plants. One of my favorite types of plants for a low light, low tech setup, which means we can add some fertilizer, but we're not going crazy with CO2. We're not spending tons of money on the highest lighting, and that's rhizome plants. So if you see those two big plants behind me, that's an Anubias, and that's an Anubias, and that's my dog Bryn. But those two plants that are Anubias are rhizome plants, which simply means they don't want to be planted in the substrate. They want to be placed onto driftwood or rocks, and they have this big, thick kind of root that goes vertical that doesn't want to be under the substrate, and they have little tiny roots that go into the substrate. So your Anubiases, your Java ferns, your Bucephalandra is a little more expensive type of rhizome plant that could require a little higher light. But Anubias, there's many different types of Anubias. There's Ornana, there's larger ones, there's ones that are variegated. Sandy Pandy says I can keep those alive. That's what it comes down to with me. These are plants that I can keep alive, and I don't hey, what's up, Jose? Ocoee Aquatics. When it comes down to plants, I don't tend to be the expert in terms of knowing all these fancy, expensive plants. I can keep some basic plants alive and grow them fairly well, and that's what I want to, kind of talk about this evening. So yeah, Anubias and Java fern. The good thing about them is, although they grow very slow, and those two Anubias plants in that tank behind me are the first two plants I ever got when I was doing some research on African cichlids. One of the plants that people recommend with them is an Anubias because it's a harder leaf, it's a thicker leaf, and Java fern. Oh, sorry guys, that's the dogs going crazy. The Anubias and Java fern tend to have a thicker leaf, which can do better sometimes with your African cichlids. But I like them. They grow slow, but they also will die slow. So that means that these Anubias behind me took a while to get adjusted, and once they did get adjusted, they're not a rapid grower. However, they're not going to fall apart on you. And there's some plants we'll get into that will grow fairly quickly, but they can also take a turn and die fairly quickly also if they don't like the parameters. The next kind of classification of plants, and these are very loose classifications like rhizome plants. The next ones, maybe someone knows the correct term. I call them more of like a free-flowing, so that they don't need to be rooted necessarily. They're not necessarily floating plants, but these are going to be something like your guppy grass, your hornwort, your pearlweed, and these tend to grow fairly quick. I've had a lot of success with guppy grass, or I believe it's Naha grass is a scientific name. It tends to provide very good coverage for fry from guppies or any livebearer for that matter. It's also great in shrimp tanks. And then, excuse me. Pearlweed is one that can be kind of rooted. I like it. I tend to just kind of grow it, once again, kind of free flowing. I got a bunch last year from Tom over at TM Aquatics. Big shout out to him. And then hornwort. Hornwort's another one that grows crazy. Sailfin Aquatics said I love hornwort. It keeps my algae in check. That's very true about hornwort. I'm not a scientist. I haven't done tons of studies on this, although I've heard and I've used it to to great effect in some of my heavier stocked tanks. Hornwort tends to battle nitrates significantly, as do floating plants. All plants consume nitrates, but the faster growing ones, such as hornwort, and a lot of the floating ones, tend to do a much better job at sucking up those nitrates and keeping that water, the water chemistry in check, and in good parameters for your fish. The next one we could touch upon is root feeders, and there's a ton of these root feeders out there. I'm going to kind of focus on some that don't need a ton of light. These are kind of still like low light. I've grown, we could talk about lighting a little bit, but a lot of these I've grown with your standard CFL bulbs, fluorescent lighting, those cheap kind of 10-gallon hoods. I also recommend some other LEDs we can get into, but none of these plants require specialty lighting, and I've grown them all, like I said, with very basic old school kind of fluorescent tube lighting and even CFL bulbs in a lot of cases. But some of the root feeders, and I want to get into some of the kind of quote-unquote carpeting plants, because I know I'm sure a lot of you guys out there, when you hear about planted tanks, everyone's drawn to that carpet look, some plant that's going to take over the entire bottom of the aquarium and carpet out. I think that's a lot of people's goals when it comes to a planted tank, visually especially. But an Amazon sword is a great one, and I've had success growing those. They're definitely heavy root feeders. Melon swords is something I've had success with also. They tend to not get as big, but once again, another root feeder. And then my favorite quote-unquote carpeting plant is going to be dwarf sage. Dwarf Sagittaria is a plant that I've had success with and have it, carpeting out. I've grown it out in a 10-gallon tank. I've grown it out in a 20-gallon long, and a little kind of sneak peek. I shared it on my Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, definitely please check me out on Instagram. I think we just hit 6,000 followers there. I have a lot of fun. I post there every day on Instagram. But I posted an office tank, and actually on my YouTube stories, I kind of teased it a little bit. But at my office, I got approval to set up a tank, and it's going to be my first time in a while actually setting up a new tank that to kind of scape and play around with and grow out. And I chose dwarf Sagittaria once again as my kind of quote-unquote carpeting plant. Diva says carpets are too much work. For sure, another plant that you can work with on a carpet that I'm not sure, I've never dealt with it personally, but a dwarf hairgrass, and I believe that would need more trimming, so to speak. I found that with this dwarf sag, if it gets decent light, low to moderate light, it's not going to grow too high on you. If I've had dwarf Sagittaria in tanks with a lot of floaters and low light, and it will tend to grow higher. So in order to keep that carpet look, you got to trim it. But I found that the dwarf sag does pretty good if it's getting at least a moderate amount of light. Steve at Warrior Planet Tank says, I saw that office tank, looks cool. I saw the sag in there. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, man. That's my secret. That tank is the Trojan horse to infect the office with fish tanks. That's going to be my goal is to kind of put that tank in there. People at the office have been teasing me. I had it set up there with no water in it for a few days, and then everyone will be like, hey man, are you going to put stuff in there? And now that I have water and plants, people are like, are you putting fish in there? Like, what's going in there? So it's slowly developing, and I think I'm going to be adding the occupants probably Friday, or probably it's bad to add them Friday. I'll probably wait till Monday. That way I can keep an eye on them. It's probably a bad idea to put them in the day before the weekend. Excuse me. So we talk about the dwarf sag. Another root feeder is the jungle val, or the Italian val, or Val Americana, just Valsinaria in general. It's great. It's going to grow a little taller, so it's great for like a background of a tank, whereas maybe like the dwarf sag is more of a foreground. Some of those swords you probably want to stick, background or mid-ground. Don't want to get into scaping too much, but I'm not an aquascaper by any means. But I think the general rule is, one of the things that I fail at is I try to cram too much things in there. So a general rule I try to go with is put in less than I think in terms of hardscape. In terms of plants, I think it's important to go with a moderate amount of plants to start. If you want a if you want a full carpet or you want this full grown in look, even if you buy a bunch of plants, you're not going to get that look. You have to buy, in my opinion, a moderate amount of plants and then let it grow in. You can't just get like 2 pieces of dwarf sage in your 55. You know, that would take forever, okay? But you want to plant it sparingly, but moderately enough that, you know, it take a few months to grow in, so to speak. And planted tanks, if you don't know by now, it's going to be a game of patience. A lot of these plants, especially the root feeders and most of these plants, they'll need time to adjust to the aquarium. Like these Anubias I got, it took at least a few weeks, for a month or two, before I saw any growth. But then after a few months, they started to take off once they got really comfortable in their surroundings. Steve's asking what kind of fish in the office tank. That's a secret, my friend. That's a secret still. If you guys have questions, definitely at me like Steve did, and then I could see the questions a little easier. Floaters. I alluded to floaters a little bit. It's one of my favorite plants to keep out in the summer tubs, which are now winter tubs. They're still going strong, but I've also been keeping them a little more inside in tanks. The one thing with the floaters, as a general rule of thumb, is they don't tend to like a lid on the aquarium. I've noticed that when you keep floaters and you have a lid, the leaves of the floaters tend to get, you know, condensation, and that does not do well. They tend to fall apart. So I've been having some success keeping them in the fish cave, but with tanks with no lids. And some of the ones that I keep that don't require, you know, a ton of light are going to be your Salvinia. I do the Minima and the Colculata, which is that cool kind of like cupping looking Salvinia. I also do Frogbit. Frogbit does well for me in pretty low to moderate light. I do red root floaters, but they do best outside, and to get that really, really red look, I would recommend more fertilizer, but also a little bit more light. So red root floaters, maybe not the best for a low light setup, but along with your duckweed, which I know by many people is like aquarium herpes and it just gets everywhere, no one wants it. I'd recommend, there's a plant called Azola, which I got hooked up with from Jose, aka Ocoee Aquatics, a few months back, earlier this year. And it's a really cool, I think it's in the duckweed family, but it's a really cool looking kind of like fancy duckweed, I call it, because it grows pretty quickly, but it's got this kind of interesting kind of fancy look. So definitely check out Azola, Azolla, I believe it is how it's spelt. It's not a plant that I see around too much, but if you can get your hands on it, it's a pretty cool floater. The roots on it are pretty short, unlike your Frogbit, which has really super long roots. Like your Salvinia will have very shorter roots. So if you want to keep floating plants for the root look, which I really like Frogbit for that reason. It's a great floater, but it will drop its roots down, and in some of the tubs outside, the roots will go down to the bottom of the tub. So it's really awesome for coverage for fish if you're keeping plants for live fish or for raising fish, breeding fish. Diva says, which floating plants don't like a lot of flow? That's another good point. I keep all my floating plants, like I said, in the tubs outside, which have no filtration, not even an air stone. And I keep them in my tanks inside, which have sponge filters only. In my experience, and from what I've read, because I haven't done it a lot, but in my experience, floating plants aren't going to like too much motion. So if you have a hang-on back filter or a canister filter cranking it, it's not going to work well with the floating plants. I've put some floating plants in my larger tanks with canister filters, and they kind of just didn't look well. My goldfish love duckweed. They ate a handful in like 5 minutes. Yes, goldfish, tilapia, a lot of fish that are plant eaters, duckweed is a perfect food for them. Steve says Azolla is cool, but it's a pain. It's nice as long as you can keep it in one tank. Yeah, that's that same thing where it's like duckweed, man. Once you get it anywhere, like I put my hand in a tank with duckweed and I'm just infected. But at least to me, it's a little better looking, and it's a little bigger, but definitely buyer beware of Azolla. It's tiny, so it can get everywhere just like a duckweed for sure. what commercial food do you suggest? Portia Holiday, we did a live stream, was it last week, about food? So we covered it in detail there. For my plecos, one of the only like commercial food brands that I'm like a fanboy of, I guess, is kind of Repashy. I don't necessarily like subscribe or only buy a certain type of flake food or what have you, but I am a fan of Repashy. Talking about live stream topics real quick. Next week, I think we're going to talk about different types of filtration. If you have, I got about probably 6 to 10, depending on how I want to pull them out, but 6 to 10 different live stream topics planned. But I'm always looking for more ideas. I really enjoy doing these live streams, so I want to keep them going as long as possible. I want to keep them, fairly structured. It's good to hang out. Hey, what's up, Catfish Cave? Hey, everyone. Hey, Ryan. Just leaving work. I'll catch you on the rerun. Hey, man, no problem. Take it easy. It's good seeing you, Catfish Cave. He's been a subscriber and a viewer for a long time. But yeah, so definitely drop me comments below, what have you, if you have other ideas for future live streams that you'd like to discuss and be a part of. So we talked about rhizome plants, one of my favorites. We talked about free-flowing. One that I missed, we talked about root feeders and we talked about floaters. I want to go back to root feeders real quick because I skipped over one of my favorite ones, and that is cryptocorynes. Cryptocorynes, and there's Crypparva, Cryptodenti, green and brown. I believe there's the Crypt Pink Flamingo. There's a bunch of different cool crypts, and those are pretty heavy root feeders. Most of them which don't require high light. They're going to be fine in your low light situations, no CO2. And they can be a carpeting plant, although, they're fairly slow growing, and typically they take some time once they get adjusted. If you move crypts when you first get them, they definitely are on that extreme side of, hey, I'm going to take a minute to get going. Whereas you may see a floater or some guppy grass or some hornwort, get a hold pretty quickly. Cryptocoryne is going to be one of those that may die back on you when you first get it, and it may just kind of stay stagnant for a while before it starts to grow. Madfish Diva says, I take duckweed out of my tanks by the pound. Can you keep duckweed with cichlids? Joseph Treadaway, that's a good question. Duckweed with cichlids. If you keep some Mbuna cichlids that are vegetarian, it may be a good food source for them. Those guys typically graze on algae, so there's some cichlids that are algae eaters and plant eaters that they may actually be a good food source, or some of your cichlids that prefer more protein diet, they may leave it alone. So depending on what you're trying to do with it, whether you're actually trying to keep it or you're trying to use it as a food, it may or may not work for you. Mark Van Wisco says floaters work pretty well with sponge filters. Yeah, that's in my experience. Sponge filters and no lids. That's my experience. This is a very good question by the Nutty Mechanic. Anyone have problems going Java moss? I wouldn't say I can't speak for everybody. I wouldn't say I have problems going Java moss, but it's at a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a commodity that's sought after. It's hard to come by. Like, I have some, I grow it, but it grows very slow for me. I know some people who say they can grow it pretty quickly. I've tried to throw it in my tubs outside, and it's grown decent, but not like anything faster than I see it in my tanks, to be honest. I know stores have a hard time keeping Java moss in stock. It's one of those things that if there's a secret code and you can grow a ton of it, it is highly sought after by breeders. One of the easiest ways to breed a lot of keely fish, or a lot of fish for that matter, is you just choke out a tank with some Java moss, and the fish can lay their eggs in there. So yeah, Java moss. This is a great segue. I'm actually going to an annual auction this Saturday in Plant City. If you guys are anywhere in Florida, in Plant City this Saturday, November 16th at 10 a.m. I believe it is, 10 a.m. I'm going to share I'm going to share it on my Facebook. I'm going to share it on my Instagram and here on YouTube, I think tomorrow. But it's going to be an annual auction, plants and fish. It should be an awesome time. But it's the Tampa Bay Aquarium Society is hosting it in Plant City this Saturday. It's all day long from like 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. It should be a freaking blast. But the reason I bring it up is at an auction, annual auction at another local fish club, the Pasco County Aquarium Club of Pasco County, which I haven't been able to attend yet. A friend of mine who is a breeder and has a farm, he literally bought all the Java moss at that auction. Like literally, he went there as a hobbyist and bought all the Java moss because it's just hard to find to use it for his breeding operation. So even people who own farms are having issues essentially obtaining all the Java moss that they want. Joseph Treadway says, I have Java moss by the truckloads. Well, dude, you need to freaking, start putting it to work or find a market for it if you're looking, because they there's a market out there for Java moss, if I'm not mistaken. I just don't use a lot of light. It grows like crazy. That's what I've heard. I've heard that with Substrate, which one of the things I was going to jump into is like the mosses. And Substrate, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is actually an algae. But it's a really cool plant, super slow growing. And I've had the most success growing it in tanks with like very low light. So I'm convinced that Substrate, and even then it's not growing like bananas, but it's growing. I can see it visually growing, every few weeks. I'm like, okay, there's definitely more there. It's moving in the right direction. But the tanks, I have it in a few tanks, but the tanks with the lowest light seem to be the most beneficial for Substrate. So I don't know if that's something or what. Plant City, baby. Yeah, it's pretty crazy that the place is called Plant City. That's kind of an interesting thing. But they're hosting it at I believe it's at a high school in Plant City, Florida. It's kind of between Orlando and Tampa. So I'm happy it's a little closer than all the way driving to Tampa. Mark Van Wisco says, Java moss grows great for me. I find it grows faster if anchored to wood. My tap water is between 7.5 and 7.8. That's great tips. I've had moss growing on some woods and some growing free form. And to be honest, most of the times that I'm trying to put it in tanks to grow it, like in a bunch, I don't stick it on wood. So maybe I'll try that. Stick it on wood and give it something to grow on. Because typically when I'm just trying let me stick it in this tank to grow a bunch, it's like a 10-gallon or a 5-gallon that I want to try some spawning in or something like that. So it's great tips. Maybe it'll grow faster when it's attached to wood or rock, etc. Moss does well at colder temperatures. That's another good tip, Diva. I know that plants, for the most part, are going to like harder water. This is just generally speaking. Plants, for the most part, are going to like some harder water. They typically do well at tropical temperatures. And I know there's some that do well maybe in like discus type tanks. But yeah, it makes sense that maybe moss does well in like something like the lower 70s. I've seen Plant City when visiting family in Florida. Yeah, I'm excited. It should be a good weekend. It's always amazing people involved with the Tampa Bay Aquarium Society. Any type of event that they seem to either put on themselves or kind of host in, like they kind of hosted it with the Florida Fancy Guppy Association. It was a conjunction with the Tampa Bay Aquarium Society, and it was phenomenal. Just great stuff. Pet Sodic says, I emailed you. I got your email. I'll respond back to you. The answer to your question is yes, but I haven't done that on like a larger scale, only locally. But I'll email you back, and we can talk some more about that. Warrior Planet Tank Steve says, that seems to be true with my Substrate grows. Only gets ambient light from the house or windows. That makes sense. I know that Wakaivo Aquatics, he was experimenting growing different mosses and Substrates in different jars in his fish room, which is cool, like his fish room / office, and in his windowsill he had some of these different jars that were growing. I have to check. I haven't touched base with him to see how they've been doing lately. Be interested to see how his Substrate and some of his plants were doing. I think he was also playing around with some submersive versus immersive growth stuff. I guess one thing to be careful of when you're buying plants, and most of the plants I'm talking about are going to be submersed grown underwater. You can run into plants that have been grown immersed out of the water. A lot of stem plants, which I didn't really get into too much, but a lot of stem plants that are sold as like bunch plants, a lot of times those can be grown immersed out of water. Typically, plants grown immersed out of water will transition, but there's going to be a dieback period. So think of like a Cryptocoryne going into your tank and just needing to adjust. You know, imagine living in air and now having to adjust to living underwater. There's going to be a little bit of a crash typically. So just keep an eye out for that. The best place, in my opinion, in terms of if we want to talk about purchasing plants, trusted sources, local, in my opinion, is always best. If you can find a local fish nerd that's got a bunch of cool plants, definitely hit them up because they're going to have similar water to you probably. Definitely ask them, make sure they're not doing a bunch of CO2 unless you want to go that route. But first and foremost to me is buy local and buy, from local hobbyists. You could also look at websites like Get Gills and Aquabid to see. And then, of course, you have, if you want to support bigger companies like Aquarium Co-op or other places, you can buy plants there, obviously, as well. A few other types of plants I want to talk about. Actually, one of my favorites is aquarium lilies. You may have heard dwarf aquarium lilies, or you may have heard of a tiger lily. Now, be wary that a dwarf aquarium lily doesn't always stay dwarf, or it may be you may be sold a dwarf aquarium lily that may be a different, species. Because I was sold a dwarf aquarium lily that stayed pretty dwarf in my tank. Gave it to my buddy Jose. He put it in one of his tubs outside, and the thing had a freaking lily pad like this big. Like I'm talking about a foot long, and it was just massive. So I don't know if that was still a dwarf aquarium lily, so to speak. But my favorite lily is the tiger lily, and they have like this really cool pattern on the leaf themselves, and it's kind of like this darker purple, but we'll also get some marbling in it. So if you're looking for some plants that aren't green, which I know a lot of people want to get into some of the more red plants or just plants that aren't necessarily green, I'd recommend some of the different types of cryptocorynes, some of the darker crypts, some of the brownish, reddish crypts, as well as a dwarf aquarium lily if you're really looking for some color in your tank. But in my opinion, I mean, green is a great color. You can get some pretty cool different shades of greens with some different, Java ferns, Anubiases, mosses. You can find some pretty cool different shades there in just the greens, in my opinion. I think we covered most types of plants. Like I said, there's a lot of different plants you can do. I think one of the ones that like I said, I not that I don't recommend them. The stem plants. If you're going to get stem plants, I recommend you get them from local hobbyists to get some trimmings. Reddit Aquaswap, I should have mentioned that. Reddit Aquaswap is still one of my favorite go-to places, guys. I beg of you to check it out and see what it's all about. I know that Reddit as a whole, as a website, as a community, can be overwhelming, but Reddit Aquaswap is an amazing community of fish nerds. You can pick up some really cool stuff. Plants, snails, which we're going to talk about snails in a planted aquarium here in a minute. But Reddit Aquaswap, I can't give it enough praise. Really cool community over there. You can pick up some really nice plants and fish, to be honest, and snails too. Ludwigia red is good. Yes, the Zen Ginger, as well as Steve pointing out Ludwigia. That's very true. That's a stem plant that you could pick up, and it should grow in fairly moderate lighting and do fairly well for you. August Duell says, what part of Florida do you live in? I might go to Eckert in St. Pete for college and was wondering if there are good fish stores around there. I don't know St. Pete that well. I'm in the Orlando area. I don't know St. Pete that well, but St. Pete and Tampa, that area, that larger area, I could tell you right now is like a mecca for fish farms. There's two clubs, Tampa Bay Aquarium Society, as well as the Aquarium Club of Pasco County. So you've got some cool stuff out there. You got some farms and wholesalers. Seagrass Farms is over there. So I'd be surprised if there wasn't some cool stores out there. But you're definitely not that far from some cool stuff, man. Definitely not that far from some cool stuff, August. And yeah, man, cool. Best of luck in college, wherever you end up going. Let's see here. Had a low light. 90 Mechanics had low light in my 36 gallon and pretty much pretty big pads, maybe 7 inches or so. You can literally watch them grow. I think you're probably talking about the dwarf aquarium lily. Yeah, that makes sense. It's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of the lilies because usually you may buy them as a bulb, Hopefully the bulb may have some roots, but a lot of times you're buying just a bulb, to be honest. And I've heard people say that there could be duds or what have you, but you buy a bulb and you'll get some leaves that sprout, some that will stay kind of mid, and then every once in a while I get that first one that shoots to the top of the aquarium and spreads out. It's a pretty neat experience because you can kind of visually see it changing and taking place and getting comfortable in your aquarium. Whereas dwarf sage is cool because you can see it kind of spread out and propagate like this. And you know, like something like a Nubius or Java fern, probably harder to watch grow. But I'd say that dwarf sage and an aquarium lily are actually kind of cool to watch grow. And one of the reasons why I planted the dwarf sage in my office tank is I like seeing it on the end when you got how the roots kind of push up against the side and you can see kind of underneath the soil how the roots look underneath the soil. I mean, it's weird like that, but I think it's pretty cool. Is that Reddit AquaSwap a website? So Reddit is a website that is full of community. So I'll give the really abbreviated breakdown real quick. I do have a video on it that dives into a little further, but Reddit is a community. I'm part of the Colts community on Reddit because I'm a big Colts fan. There's just an aquariums community on Reddit that talks about aquariums. There's one called shrimp tanks that talk about shrimp tanks, but there's ones for, I mean, just like think of Facebook groups, right? You have ones for cars that are groups. I know my buddy Jose, who's in the some of the fish ones, he's also in one for his, his car groups. There's politics, there's, meme ones, there's all different types of stuff. But that's why I can get a bad rap because it's these communities of anything you could think of. But there happens to be probably a dozen or so different communities around fish stuff. There's some saltwater stuff, but the one that I really like is called AquaSwap. And AquaSwap is the specific community on Reddit that deals with the buying, selling, and trading of fish, plants, tanks, etc. But if you check out my video, I go into it a little further and why I think it's like one of the coolest unknown resources or hardly known resources in our hobby. Nocturnal Aquarius says, what's up, man? Coming down to Tampa and Pensacola, Florida this weekend for some filming and collecting. You know of any spots to hit up for collecting on a Sunday trip? Man, you should come on Saturday. And I don't know how far you're coming from. You should come on Saturday and come to the auction in Plant City. I don't know how far you have to come. Coming to the Tampa and Pensacola, Florida this weekend. I don't know any specific spots, man. I've never been collecting over there. Although, if you're going to be collecting in Pensacola, try to find the Gulf Coast pygmy sunfish, Elasoma gilbertii. But yeah, man, best of luck. That sounds amazing. I hope you have some success. But it's always fun just to get out there, even if you don't catch what you're after, or even collect any fish. It's always cool just to get out there in the water and enjoy nature. Wish I had some more spots for you. Maybe check out Aquafunk, Aquafunk Aquatics. He goes collecting out there. Maybe drop him a line on YouTube here or Instagram. He may be able to help you out because he lives over the Tampa area. Selfin says, I'm in Orlando too. Do you know of any good stores here in Orlando? Heck yeah, man. Big shout out to, these are good friends of mine, Kevin and Rick. They're brothers, and they own Aquascaping Supply just south of downtown Orlando, okay? Aquascaping Supply, they're specialized in planted tanks. They have tons of stuff from hardscapes. They're the spot to go to in Orlando for your different woods, your different rocks, your different nano fish and species. Like, they don't carry African cichlids. They specifically carry your tetras, your pencil fish, your scarlet batis, like all the cool stuff. All different types of plants, high light, low light, the different nano tanks, all that stuff. They don't pay me or anything like that. They're just friends of mine, and I support them, always, because this is awesome. They're just good people, and they own a local store here. So definitely check them out. I'm also a big fan of up in northern Orlando is in Castleberry, Something Fishy in Castleberry. I did a video there. They're really good people. They sell some plants as well, but nothing like the Aquascaping Supply. There's a few other stores. I also like what is it called? Pet Bazaar. Pet Bazaar is also a good store that I recommend. They do sell some plants as well, but they do a bunch of stuff in reptiles. Whereas Aquascaping Supply is not only just fish, but pretty much like planted fish, that kind of stuff. All right, enough of that. Enough of that advertisement. But no, they're really good people. Kevin and Rick are awesome dudes. I'm happy to know them and call them friends. Nocturnal Aquarius says, where's the auction again? I may be able to swing through there. When my mom was at an event. It is in Plant City. I'll have to post it. If you follow me on Instagram, I'll post it. You could check out Tampa Bay Aquarium Society's website. It's tbas1.com, just a number, tbas1.com. And I think they have a link there to it. You scroll down and go down and go to 2019 annual auction, Tampa Bay Aquarium Society. It should be there. We'll definitely check out Reddit. Yeah, you should, man. Hopefully it makes sense, and you get some good scores there. I missed the event by a week. I'll be down there next Friday. Anything going on that weekend? I'm not sure, Steve. I'm not sure the Friday after that. Because usually that's like a monthly thing for that. So I think they had a store hop, I think last week. But I don't think anything's crazy going on. But like I said, maybe we can get together. Me, you, Funk, and Roberto can get together and do something out that way. I should be around. Hey, is 3 4-inch cholla wood worth $10? Well, it depends. You live in Arizona. Can you go collect it yourself in Arizona? If that's the case, then no. But no, in all seriousness, it's probably not a bad deal. Like I bought some on AquaSwap on Reddit, and I think I paid about $5 for that size. So it depends. $10 at a retail store, probably the going rate, depending on where you live. But if you poke around, that's one of the cool things about AquaSwap on Reddit. You have people that go collect the cholla wood for free and they sell it for cheap, or they go and collect leaves, mulberry leaves in their backyard, and they sell them for cheap. And it's a lot cheaper than going and getting them from, a retail store. And they're Aquarius. There's a rating system on there. You get upvoted. So there's always risk involved with anything, but it's a pretty regulated system, and people there are pretty cool. Let's talk a little bit about substrates. The truth is, you can go with a lot of different substrates. I've used sand and it's worked. I've used dirt and it's worked. I've used gravel and it's worked. I've used a combination and it's worked. I've used some of the fancy pre-made packages like EcoComplete and it's worked. So in my opinion, most of my tanks in the fish cave have a dirted substrate. I think that's one of the quickest ways. It definitely takes some research. I think it's definitely quick. It definitely takes some research. There's a lot of different opinions on it. I definitely do some research before you just go throw some dirt in the tank and throw some plants in there. But I buy topsoil. I take some of the larger pieces of organic, so like sticks and leaves or whatever, and the larger pieces, take them out. I only use about an inch, or maybe 1.5 inches tops, and then I cover that with some gravel to keep it down. And I've used that on the vast majority of my tanks. Like I said, you definitely want to do some more research into it, but I find that a dirted tank does fairly well. But I think what just as well is gravel. You go and buy some gravel, whether it be standard color, whether it be black or pink or teal, rainbow. Use root tabs. If you're going to have gravel, the downside of gravel is it's inert, which means it's got nothing in there. It's just rock. It's not going to provide any nutrients to your plants, right? And even plants like a rhizome plant, like a Java fern or a Nubius that's sitting on a rock, or driftwood, is typically going to send its little tinier roots down into the substrate or down and want to get some type of nutrients from the soil. Alternatively, they can collect nutrients from the water column, which is when we use liquid fertilizer, right? And there's a bunch of different ones out there for that. But if you're going to be using gravel, especially if you're going to be keeping root feeders, you're going to be wanting root tabs. And root tabs, you can find them made by many different people out there. You can utilize root tabs, and they will provide a long-term source. Think of them as like a slow release tab for your plants. So if you use dirt, you don't necessarily need root tabs because that dirt is full of all the beneficial nutrients. But if you're just using gravel, you're going to want to use root tabs without a doubt to see the best results. Especially if you have your dwarf sage, your cryptocorynes, your stem plants, your Amazon swords, anything that's sticking there in the thing. Does your Loach Gang t-shirt come in children's sizes? My 8-year-old son wants one for Christmas. Done. I'll make it happen. I don't think I have any children's sizes there right now, but I'll make that happen, Tiffany Holmes. Make that happen for sure. I'll create that, and then I will give me a day or two, and I'll make it happen. But that's awesome. I'm glad that that's cool to see that, you know, younger kids in the generation into the hobby. You know, that's awesome. And especially Loach fans. That's cool. So yeah, and then in terms of like the Eco Complete versus Fluval Stratum versus whatever, it's kind of like most fish foods. I'm not going to sit here and say one's much better than the other. I think they probably all work great. In my opinion, if you're here and we're talking about low tech, low light, we're talking usually, you know, on the budget side of things. So I say, my opinion, start with some gravel and some root tabs, or look into a dirted tank and go that route. I think you'll have success there. That's just my opinion and my advice. Take it for what it is. Unfortunately, I'll be about 7 hours away from the auction on Saturday, not feeling the 14-hour drive back and forth. Yeah, I don't blame you, man. But yeah, if you're coming down on Sunday, try to get in touch with Jay. Hopefully he has some spots in mind. He's been doing some cool stuff collecting out there. Him and Roberto got some cool cichlids. It's interesting to see kind of what's in the waterways, I guess, native as well as invasive. I didn't know the TBS was at Marine and Warehouse. Oh yeah, I didn't. Yeah, okay. So Aqua Discovery is talking about Tampa Bay Aquarium Society went to Marine Warehouse last Sunday. That was what they did, a little like kind of a store hop or a shop hop type deal. So typically Tampa Bay Aquarium Society meets every month, once a month. We didn't have a regular meeting this month, but we are doing the annual auction, and they also did an extra little side gig thing, which was a little meetup. A few months back, they also did a collecting trip get-together in addition to the monthly meeting. So there's always kind of cool little things going on. Excuse me. You can check them out at Tampa Bay Aquarium Society has a pretty active Facebook group. Even if you don't go to the meetings, you could still join the Tampa Bay Aquarium Society Facebook group. People are always posting things there, and it's pretty active, and there's a lot of good knowledge there. And like I said, they're doing lots of events, not just the meetings, but the Guppy Show and the shop hops and collecting trips and the auctions, etc., etc., etc. Have you ever heard of DIY Osmocote root tabs? They are awesome. Yes, I've heard of them. I've used them. I haven't done tons of studies in terms of, you know, I'm sure if you've used them, you've heard of the concerns some people have, how if you're not familiar, Osmocote is like a plant fertilizer used for normally terrestrial plants, like your house plants. And what people have done is you can take the little beads, you put them in like a little gel cap, like a little pill capsule, and you make your own DIY root tabs. You push that into the substrate, and once again, it works like a root tab and slowly releases the fertilizer over a period of time. People out there have said that those can cause ammonia spikes. I'm not sure. I can't, confirm or deny that, but it's just something to take into account when using them. Caleb Aquatics with the 199. I think it's a sticker. Hey you. Hey, what's up, man? I think those are fairly new stickers. That's our first sticker here. Hey, Brindle, it's okay, baby girl. Hey, Brindle, it's okay. Come here. It's okay. Bryn. Someone's taking a walk and Bryn's on high alert. It's okay. Good girl. Someone get this man a hydro flask. I'm not sure if a hydro flask. I'm trying to get sponsored by Publix, man. I'm trying to get sponsored by Publix. I'm not sure what a hydro flask is. Maybe it's some fancy dancy water drinking apparatus. I don't drink as much when I'm in the office. I drink way too much. I'm always the guy that has to change the water jug at the office. I don't mind it, but I'm there so frequently that it's always on me that I'm always the guy who runs it out of water. I have like a 24-ounce cup at work that I drink. I don't know how many times a day, but my body is, well, I think we're all like a high percentage of water, but I'm like 90% water and a lot of fat. How much poop and stuff needs to seep into the gravel rocks before you can stop using root tabs? That's an interesting question. So what Joe is saying is essentially, and I guess this is kind of true, if you have a tank, and that's another thing in terms of a planted tank, how often do you gravel vac? I don't gravel vac my planted tanks that often. I'm gonna talk about maybe once every few months. Typically, you want to gravel vac your tank. If you have a planted tank, that poop, that's debris, that mulm that's kind of settling, like Joe is kind of alluding to, that can be your fertilizer for your plants, right? So I don't know what the exact ratio is, or it's like, okay, you don't need any root tabs because you have this fish poop. I would think that fish poop, the breakdown of fish poop, I think that root tabs are probably more ideally constructed to have the proper amounts of this mineral, that mineral, and so on and so forth, rather than fish poop. I could be wrong. Like in nature, it's not like the plants have root tabs in nature, right? So I don't know if there's a specific level where it's like, okay, we don't need root tabs because we have the fish poop. I think that's kind of got to be an eyeball thing and a tank thing in each individual tank. Whereas, how do you know how to change your root tabs? You can go by what's suggested, but also you kind of have to know your own tank. And they may say 1 every 3 inches, 6 inches, but at the very beginning of your tank, your Amazon sword may be a baby and it's not eating up much. But 6 months into it may be a behemoth, and you need to juice it up with more root tabs. So it may be a crappy answer, but I think it's one of those things where you kind of gotta go with it, and kind of it's a tank by tank situation almost. I just refill my used Gatorade bottles. I think we're talking about drinking water, maybe. Dan's Fish in 10 minutes. Yes, I didn't check out his stream to see what he's giving away. He usually gives away something, so he's probably giving away something cool tonight. But definitely in a few minutes here, we're wrapping up, and go check out Dan's Fish. Got a few more topics. I want to talk about lighting real quick, and then snails. And with lighting, I alluded to it earlier. Sometimes less is more, especially we learned with Wassertang. But also, when we're talking about lighting, like I said, I've had success with the CFLs and fluorescent lighting. I do own, thanks to Aquarium Co-op, I do own a Fluval 3.0 light. I had that sucker on a 20-gallon, like across 2 20-gallon longs, and it just algae, like literally way too much juice. Even when I lowered it down, there's way too much juice for a 20-gallon long for my low light plants. So it is now on a 55-gallon in my living room, the native tank, and it's doing much better. So I would even argue that some of these budget, aka discount lights you can find on eBay, your Aquanites and your what's the other brand name? I wrote it down here. Aquanites, Beamsworks is another one. I have not done extensive tests between them, but I have used them both. I've used Aquanite and I've used Beamworks with success. But like I said, even with fluorescent bulbs, you're going to be good. One of my biggest tips with lighting is to regulate it, okay? Algae problems are something we run into a lot in planted tanks. So my advice to you is invest in a timer. I think you'll be very, very appreciative, because all it takes is 1 or 2 nights of you forgetting the light on the whole night, and you have an algae outbreak. So when you have a timer, it takes kind of the human element out of it, and that's my biggest tip, is get a timer on your tanks for sure. Do you like that Fluval? Is it good on the 55? Yeah, I think it's good on the 55. I've got some the plants I'm growing there are fairly basic to begin with, so they're not like I'm growing crazy stuff. But I do like the Fluval on the 55. I think it's good for that tank. Even at a lowered, I think you could probably put it at 20%, 10%, and run it on your 20-gallon long. But the depth on that tank is just so, it's only, what are they 10 inches or 12 inches high? So it beats down on that, and it's just not needed, in my opinion and in my experience. The Aquanite is good, but the ballast always goes bad. The Beamswork is good. Personally, I'm really happy with the Vivagrow. Okay, I trust Steve. Steve is an awesome guy, very knowledgeable about plants. If you're into planted tanks, definitely check out his channel. I shared one of his videos recently where he did and I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know there was different. I knew there's different seasons, but his knowledge is just mind-blowing. But anyway, he has a bunch of beautiful tanks, but he has this one that I shared the other day with some awesome angelfish. It's heavily tannins, and he kind of escapes it, and he plays it along with the different seasons of the Amazon River and the rainy season, dry season, and he's been kind of documenting his journey. So really knowledgeable guy, and I trust him. You know, like I said, I have Aquaneat and Beamswork both doing well. I've never used the Viva Grow, but definitely I'll probably take a look at the Viva Grow. Never heard of it before. Want to talk about snails real quick, because snails and planted tanks just seem to kind of go hand in hand. And my big thing is with planted tanks, it's not a matter of if you're going to run into snails, it's a matter of when. Typically, the snails you're going to run into are the quote-unquote pest snails, right? You're not going to get a cool rabbit snail. You're probably not going to get a mystery snail tagging along, like a beautiful purple magenta mystery snail. You're going to get your bladder snails. You're going to get your Malaysian trumpet snails. You're going to get your ram's horn snails. Maybe if you're lucky, you get some red ram's horn snails. But when you get plants, there's ways you can, you can buy all plants that were grown from a petri dish, right? Unlikely to happen. But if you get plants, you can do bleach dips. You can use what's that spice? Someone in the chat. It's not cumin. It's not allspice. There's a spice out there that you can dip plants in that will sometimes get rid of some different bacterias and snails. But you can do a bleach dip. I have some friends that do bleach dips. My thing is, I lean into them. Most of my tanks have snails. The population tends to not go crazy unless I'm overfeeding. And I do believe that, I do find that assassin snails tend to keep most pest snail populations in check. Assassin snails, they'll spawn as well and they'll populate in your tank. But I lean into the snails and kind of work with them. Yes, that's the word I was thinking of. Tissue culture, petri dish, and the tissue culture plants. This is not, it's not possible. I mean, you could try. Alum, yes, thank you. Candy, you were slow to it on this time. Peppercini got it, and then Candy was right behind it. Alum or alum. I've never used it, but if you're one of those people who wants to do planted tanks and you're like super anti-snail, I think alum may help. I think a bleach dip. There's ways to do it. Like I said, don't just go sticking your plants in bleach. But there's some ways to help control it. But typically, it's the eggs. The eggs, all those snails really kind of hide their eggs on these on driftwood, on plants, on all these different things we put in our tanks. I feed my chickens the extra snails. Hey, that's pretty cool. First off, kudos. That's cool that you have chickens. I'm intrigued. But yeah, no, I feed my extra snails to nobody right now. But I'd like to. Well, to the clown loaches get some extra snails. But I'd like to eventually get some puffers. I think I talked about it on a different live stream, and feed the extra snails to maybe some Chaldentite puffers. But that's in the future. Big shout out to all the mods. Thank you guys for holding it down. I don't give you guys enough credit for hanging out with me here and helping keep things in check. So thank you. Appreciate you guys always. As a reminder, all my mods, this is our 4th or 5th live stream now. None of my mods were asked to be a mod. I kind of just threw them into this and just kind of roped them into it. So thank you guys. I appreciate you. And everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. Big shout out to Caleb's Aquatics for the our first super sticky, or I don't know what they're called, like a super chat with a sticky. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for hanging out and the great questions. Next week, we're going to be talking about different types of filtration. Wednesday, right here, 8 p.m. on Wild Fish Tanks, guys. As always, for myself and my dogs that are around here, stay positive, guys, and stay passionate. And yeah, check out Dan's Fish next.